Okay, let's jump right in. We are doing a deep dive today into R.J. Ellory's Quiet Vendetta. And this is a unique one. We're not just tracking a killer here.
Not at all.
We're basically performing a literary autopsy on the soul of New Orleans. We're looking at how political power and, organized crime became so tangled up over decades.
That's it, exactly. For this, we've synthesized a huge amount of source material. I mean, we're talking police reports, really detailed forensic breakdowns, FBI transcripts of these incredibly tense negotiations, and some just harrowing personal accounts.
Right.
And our mission really is to untangle this decades-long web that connects a local detective, a special FBI agent who's coming back to a home he absolutely hates, the city's whole crime structure, and the sitting governor.
And the opening scene, I mean, it doesn't pull any punches. It's just a shockwave hitting the city. We start in a dark New Orleans alleyway. It's off Gravier Street. We have a high-profile kidnapping. Catherine Ducane, the governor's daughter, is missing. And at the same time, this brutal, almost ritualistic murder.
And the victim of that murder is Gerard McCahill. He's found beaten to death with a hammer. His body was stuffed into the trunk of this really conspicuous car, a pristine vintage 57 Mercury Cruiser. But as local detective John Verlaine finds out pretty fast, the horror was just getting started.
This is where it gets, really interesting, and it moves way beyond a standard murder case. McCahill wasn't just beaten. He was treated like a surgical specimen.
The sources describe it as a brutal and sadistic termination, but then they immediately contrast that with the precision of a surgeon when they talk about the chest opening.
A surgeon?
Yeah. And the ritual itself, it just defies immediate logic. The heart was cut out, meticulously severed from all the major vessels, and then it was replaced, put right back inside the chest cavity.
So this isn't rage.
No, this is a message, and it's delivered with this incredibly methodical cruelty.
But the truly unique signature, the one detail that just sets the stage for this entire vendetta, is the mark they left on McCahill's back.
Yes. The medical examiner identified a meticulously drawn constellation, Gemini. And this constellation was drawn with quinine, which is a substance that glows this eerie whitish-blue color under ultraviolet light.
Wow.
This immediately suggests a level of sophistication far beyond, a local street crime. It's a targeted assassination carrying an ancient, very specific code.
So we have two guides trying to navigate this whole mess. On the ground, we've got Detective John Verlaine, the local cop, who's seeing the immediate, visceral ugliness of his city.
Right.
And then you have the reluctant federal involvement. FBI Special Investigator Ray Hartmann, who gets pulled back to the one place he swore he would never, ever return to, and it's only because the governor's daughter is the missing victim. Let's start at the crime scene with Verlaine. The brutality of it, death by hammer, it contrasts so sharply with the clinical precision of the surgeon. What does that duality tell the investigators about the perpetrator's state of mind?
Well, it suggests dual intentions, right?
Yeah.
Hammer beating, that conveys rage, or maybe just efficiency, just getting the job done fast. But all the post-mortem activity, the chest opening, the ritual, the constellation, that indicates a very calculated, very controlling mindset. Verlaine's initial contact, the county coroner, Michael Cipriano, he gave this cynical but vital assessment. He noted that the operation itself was done lickety-split.
Lickety-split.
Yeah, which means the killer had both strength and speed and probably had done this kind of thing before.
And the car, the 57 Mercury Cruiser, that offers some critical physical clues, doesn't it?
It does, and this is where the sources get into some fascinating forensic detail. The analysis suggests that the chest might have been open while McCahill was still in the back seat.
In the car?
In the back seat, yeah. It created this thick lake of dried blood right there before the body was moved into the trunk. This implies the killer needed privacy and mobility for the ritual, but the actual killing happened somewhere else earlier.
And they were able to deduce a physical profile just from the act of moving the body. That's remarkable.
Absolutely. The killer, in transferring the body from the back seat to the trunk, must have leveraged himself against the rear wing of the cruiser. So forensic techs found these tiny scratches consistent with denim rivets, a tiny detail, a tear in the surface paint.
Just from a pair of jeans.
Just from a pair of jeans. Based on the angle and the height of those scratches, they estimated the killer was a strong, well-built male, probably 5'10" or 5'11". It's a fantastic example of how environmental evidence can betray the perpetrator's physical presence.
Okay, let's dive deeper into the symbolism, starting with the heart. It's cut out, then replaced. The source material references something called the Devore thing of 68. For listeners who aren't, steeped in New Orleans organized crime history. What exactly was that?
The DeVore thing was, it was a local underworld legend. It was almost a cautionary tale used to enforce silence and loyalty. It all stemmed from this massive betrayal within the local crime structure back in 1968. A man named DeVore was killed after informing on his associates,
Okay.
and the ritual then was extreme. His heart was cut out and famously sent, wrapped in silk, to his wife, who had been unknowingly involved in his betrayal.
That is intensely graphic.
It is. And crucially, in the original DeVore thing, the body was almost never found. The symbolic message was always delivered, but the physical evidence was just erased.
But in McHale's case, the killer replaced the heart.
Exactly. He replaced the heart and left the body in a conspicuous car. It's a twisted inversion. It invokes the history of betrayal, but it ensures the body is found, multiplying the shock factor and announcing the return of an old, very brutal code.
And this brings us back to the constellation of Gemini, meticulously drawn on his back with quinine, glowing under a UV light. Why Gemini? Why such a high degree of, theatrical, almost astronomical sophistication?
The Gemini constellation, the twins, that is the crucial identifier. Cipriano, the coroner, he noted that this image deeply haunted Verlaine because it pushed the case out of the realm of any common criminal motive and into, high-level signaling.
Right.
While Verlaine initially suspected the 57 Mercury might be a red herring, the constellation confirms that every single detail, the car, the ritual, the victim, is a specific targeted sign. As we're going to discover, this code links directly back to the highest levels of organized crime and political maneuvering from decades before.
So it's the killer saying.
It's the killer saying, I speak a language only a few powerful men understand.
And Verlaine, meanwhile, is just stuck in the immediate reality. He's dealing with the body, the bizarre car, and all the local cynicism.
He is. He's the grounding force. He's the one wrestling with the idea that he, Cipriano, and the ME are the only ones crazy enough to share their breath with this kind of sociopath. He understands that this case, starting on Gravier Street, is way too big to be contained by local police tape. This pressure immediately pushes him to seek connections, realizing that the solution won't be found in modern forensics alone. It's going to be found in history.
So the local horror of the McKay Hill murder is then met with the federal drama of the Ducane kidnapping, and this forces the entry of Ray Hartmann. His profile shows a man who's already battling this profound internal conflict.
Hartmann is 37, but he carries the weight of a man twice his age. He's a special investigator brought in because of the political profile of the victim, Catherine Ducane.
Of course.
He's separated from his wife, Carol, and his 12-year-old daughter, Jessica. And critically, he's a recovering alcoholic. He's just achieved 8 months of sobriety when he gets this call. So this case isn't just professional for him. It's a direct challenge to his very fragile stability.
And New Orleans is the absolute last place he wanted to be. He had actively sought to escape, moving to New York in 1988 because it was most unlike New Orleans. He'd worked as a public defender, studying the law like there was an answer to be found, believing logic could solve the chaos he grew up with.
His history in New Orleans is tragic. The death of his younger brother, his mother's subsequent broken heart. His return is described as being dragged home. The city represents everything he associates with failure and grief, but his personal crisis is precisely what makes him useful to the kidnapper.
Let's talk about the kidnapper, Ernesto Perez. He specifically requested Hartmann. The FBI sees Perez as a wacko and an insane criminal psychopath, but his communication style suggests something else entirely.
Oh, Perez is highly sophisticated, and he knew exactly how to destabilize Hartmann from the first second. The first direct call begins not with the demand, but with this chilling personal greeting. Mr. Ray Hartmann, welcome home to New Orleans.
Wow.
It's a direct acknowledgement of Hartmann's history and his reluctance to even be there.
Perez immediately elevates the conversation from a ransom negotiation to an intellectual confrontation. He references historical figures. He mentions that he and Hartmann will be like Robert Harrison and Howard Rushmore. Who were they, and why would Perez invoke their names?
This is a real deep cut, but it's vital for context. Harrison and Rushmore were figures associated with mid-20th century investigative journalism and, exposure. They were known for digging into political corruption and the connections between powerful figures and the underworld, often leading to these massive scandals.
So by referencing them, Perez is sending a crystal clear signal to Hartmann. This is not a negotiation about money. This is about exposing the truth.
Exactly. Perez is positioning himself not as a mere criminal, but as a reluctant agent of retribution. He sees himself as the necessary catalyst for exposing the corruption that Ducane represents. And this reference, combined with the Gemini constellation, immediately convinces Hartmann that this man is more sophisticated than the regular kind of thug. Perez is seeking a dramatic reveal, and he's using the kidnapping as his stage.
So Hartmann realizes he can't just rely on FBI procedures and surveillance. He needs to ground himself in the city's reality, which is what leads him to Detective Verlaine.
Their alliance is crucial. Hartmann sees a little of himself in Verlaine, a similar weariness, a shared understanding of the city's grime. Verlaine is the key to local knowledge and connections, and Verlaine, in turn, shares this cryptic one-word message he received. Always.
And that one word, always, leads Verlaine to Antoine, Daddy Always, Farad. Farad is described as Louisiana as they came, a local power broker who operates with total impunity. This is the heart of the local corruption Verlaine has to navigate.
Farad embodies that toxic history we mentioned earlier. He represents the system of police concessions. This means the local police effectively make compromises with powerful figures like Farad. They allow them to operate certain levels of crime gambling, labor racketeering, in exchange for peace, control, and keeping real chaos off the streets.
So it's a bargain.
It's a bargain with the devil. So when Verlaine visits Farad, who's sitting in his deep blue leather armchair smoking a cigar, the ultimate warning is...
What is the warning?
Farad tells Verlaine in no uncertain terms to walk away. He claims the man they seek, meaning Perez, is not part of their New Orleans world. He's from the outside, meaning he operates outside the established rules of the local concessions. Farad warns that this man will bring with him something that was big enough to swallow us all.
So he's not protecting Perez.
No, he's protecting the delicate, decades-old ecosystem of corruption that Perez threatens to collapse by exposing its foundations.
We've established Perez as this sophisticated antagonist, but to really understand his vendetta, we need to trace his roots, which, ironically, start right back in New Orleans, despite Farad's claim that he's from the outside.
Right. Perez, in his late 60s, was born in Louisiana, but is of Cuban descent. He actually shares Fidel Castro Ruiz's August 13th birthday, a detail he mentions to highlight his connection to this revolutionary spirit he once admired. His childhood was defined by his father, the Havana Hurricane, a brutal, bare-knuckle brawler who drank himself into these fits of violence. Perez witnessed him beat at least 3 men to death, bodies often dismembered and dumped in Lake Borgne.
Just unimaginable trauma.
Yeah.
But his mother offered a counter-narrative, didn't she?
She was the intellectual anchor, an intelligent, perceptive woman who used reading as an escape, and she instilled in young Ernesto the value of knowledge and attention. She urged him to become someone she could be proud of. This tension, the father's brute force versus the mother's quiet intellect, that's the core conflict that drives Perez's entire adult life. He commits horrific violence, but always with an intellectualized, rationalized justification.
And that conflict reached its devastating peak in December 1958.
Yes. Perez witnessed his father murder his mother by breaking her neck in a fit of insatiable sexual fury. This trauma is the defining moment. The very next day, a shell-shocked Perez fled to Havana, arriving on New Year's Day 1959, right on the cusp of the Cuban Revolution.
And it was there that he committed parricide. He killed his father. How did Perez rationalize this ultimate act of violence?
He murdered his father by slitting his throat. Perez, he initially tried to view it as an act of mercy or justice. His father was a broken, remorseful man after killing his wife, and Perez reasoned that his father's broken spirit was a worse penance than death. But ultimately, the source suggests it was an act of survival, a desperate move to break the cycle and just escape the immediate threat of his environment.
This feeds directly into his later philosophical debate with Hartmann about choice versus circumstance. But the real inflection point, the moment where the violence became what he called a virus, happened when he was just 15 years old in Evangeline, Louisiana.
This is the moment Perez chooses violence for personal gain. He's in Evangeline, this desolate town described as a place you leave, never arrive in. He meets a man named Carol Chevron, a traveling salesman peddling these immensely expensive volumes of genius books Perez coveted because he felt owning them would fulfill his mother's dream of him becoming a man like Fidel Castro Ruz.
He killed for knowledge, for status.
He did. He murdered Chevron to steal the books and the money. The brutality here is shocking because of its premeditation. He crushed Chevron's head and face beneath his car tires and systematically smashed the victim's fingers against a rock to prevent future fingerprint identification.
At 15.
At 15 years old, this is the act of a methodical killer, even as a teenager.
The violence is delivered with analysis. How did Perez himself view this act later in life?
He didn't deny the motive. He rationalized it. He said, "I killed a man for something I believed I could own. I believed then that such things were in my blood." The chilling conclusion is that the necessity of killing for survival, for status, became like a virus gripping him. It removed the moral barrier, making all subsequent violence easier to commit. And this backstory is crucial because it establishes that Perez is fully capable of choosing to stop the violence, but only when his own very complex moral calculus dictates it.
So Perez, armed with this blend of intellectual rationalization and inherited brutality, he enters the organized crime structure via Cuba in 1959.
Yes. In Havana, he works as a street hustler and a rent boy, robbing his clients with a guy named Ruben Cienfuegos. This life leads him to Pietro Silvino, a relative of Santo Trafficante, a massively influential American mobster with key casino interests in Havana, places like the Sanssouci, the Comodoro, and the Capri. Trafficante was a major player whose interests were totally destabilized by the Cuban Revolution.
And Perez murders Silvino. How does he survive that, given the power of the Trafficante family? That should have been a death sentence.
It should have been. But he's protected by Don Giancarlo Seriano, an underboss for the Gambinos. Seriano masterfully recruited Perez by leveraging Silvino's secret that he paid boys for sex to the family.
Okay.
So Seriano fabricated a story. Silvino was killed by a Cuban thief whom Perez, Seriano's friend, identified and killed in an act of revenge. This cover story earned Perez a name, a small name, but a name nevertheless, an entry into the protection and structure of the Italian-American mafia. It gave him something he could finally understand.
That structure carries him to America. By 1962, he's in Miami with the Seriano family, driving the very Mercury cruiser that had belonged to the murdered Silvino. And this is the year he first encounters Charles Ducane, the future governor.
This is the critical juncture where organized crime and Louisiana politics fuse. Perez attended a meeting involving Antoine Farad, daddy always, and a young, ambitious Charles Ducane. Ducane needed a solution to send an unmistakable but unconnectable message to a union man whose brother, a manager, was becoming troublesome.
This sounds like standard political maneuvering, except, it involves murder.
It does. Ducane explicitly wanted the violence to look like the work of a crazy person or a crime of passion, something completely untraceable back to his political organization, and Perez delivered. He murdered the manager and the woman he was with at the Shell Beach Motel, setting the precedent that defined Ducane's career. Orchestrated violence carried out by others, allowing him to maintain his clean political facade. This established Ducane's long-standing, indirect involvement in murder.
Now we make the huge jump to 1975 and we get the bombshell confession. Perez confirms his involvement in the ultimate organized crime cold case, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa.
This is a massive revelation, just casually dropped during his exchange with Hartmann. Perez was working for the Lucchese family under Don Fabio Caligaris in New York and Chicago. Hoffa was defying the terms of his clemency deal, the 10-year ban on union activity, and was, as Perez put it, pissing my employers off something serious.
And Perez was the triggerman in Bloomfield Township, Michigan in July 1975.
He confirmed he used a wire around Hoffa's neck from the backseat of a car. And yes, ironically, given the New Orleans murder, the source indicates it was likely a Mercury. The details are shocking, but the crucial point is the code word.
The Gemini constellation.
Exactly. Hartmann, realizing the significance of the clue left on McCahill's body, makes the connection. Gemini was the specific internal mafia code name for the Hoffa hit. It was a secret designation used only by the families involved. By painting Gemini on McCahill's back, Perez was sending an unmistakable, decades-old message directly to Governor Ducane.
A message that says, we know your secrets, we know your history, and we know you were involved in the events that led to Hoffa's disappearance.
Precisely. McCahill, found beaten in New Orleans, was likely tied to the old Chicago Lucchese operations, maybe as the intermediary who carried out Ducane's earlier directives, or just as someone who knew too much. McCahill's ritual murder wasn't random. It was done to remind the sitting governor that the violence he outsourced in 1962 and the cover-ups that followed, including the Hoffa operation, had not been forgotten.
And despite this dark, incredibly complicated career, Perez tried to build a normal life.
He did. He married a woman named Angelina Tiacoli and had twins, Victor and Lucia. He genuinely strove to be a good father and husband, but inevitably the two worlds collided. The tragic turning point was when Angelina and Lucia were killed in Chicago in a failed hit targeting his boss, Don Caligaris. The identity of the perpetrator was unknown, but the loss left Perez consumed by guilt and a lifelong desire for revenge. And this is where the vendetta truly starts. It's not just political, it's deeply, deeply personal.
Okay, now we return to the Royal Sonesta Hotel, where Perez is effectively dictating the terms. The FBI is desperate, and they offer clemency and extradition to Cuba in exchange for Catherine Ducane's location.
The FBI saw this as the ultimate bargaining chip, but Perez just mocked their predictability. He was far beyond concerns about jail or death. He dismisses the idea of a guidebook for life, stating he isn't interested in escaping consequence. He challenges the very premise of their negotiation, showing he knows they need him far more than he needs their offer.
So if he doesn't want clemency, what is the core motive driving this entire incredibly dangerous operation?
The core motive is exposure and a personal, long-delayed justice. He returned to New Orleans after he learned Charles Ducane had become governor in 2000, realizing the past had been there all along and it was just waiting for me to come home. Perez seeks to tear down the veneer of respectability that Ducane built on the bodies that Perez helped create, forcing a powerful man to finally face the consequences of decades of moral compromise.
And he chose Ray Hartmann for incredibly specific personal reasons that go far beyond just being a Louisiana.
He chose Hartmann because he needed an investigator who understood the moral weight of conflict. Hartmann's battle with alcohol, his failures with Carol and Jessica, they mirrored Perez's own internal life. The loss of Angelina and Lucia, and the guilt he carried over his necessary violence. Perez saw Hartmann as someone who understood the internal conflict of loyalty and duty. He knew Hartmann carried the weight of bad choices, just as Perez did.
So this confrontation spirals into that fundamental philosophical debate we referenced earlier, choice versus circumstance. How does Perez approach this?
Perez argues that while circumstances shape us, ultimately every action, including murder, is an act of choice. He views his own violence as an equation of survival. His actions were adjudicated to be the most contributive to his own survival or the survival of that which owned his loyalty. He sees his life as a series of necessary intellectualized choices made under duress, and he challenges Hartmann to admit that his own failures were also choices.
While the motivation is exposed, the fate of Catherine Ducane remains paramount to the FBI. How does Perez keep the pressure on?
He uses the chilling rule of threes, reference air, water, food. This implies she is hidden somewhere where resources are scarce, which maintains immense psychological pressure on the governor and the FBI. The focus shifts entirely to Ducane's crumbling political life, with Catherine's immediate fate left tantalizingly unresolved in the source material, forcing the reader to focus on the political fallout.
And we get a crucial insight into Perez's capacity for redemption through his relationship with his surviving son, Victor.
This is a complex moment. Victor cut off ties with his father because Perez, years after his own family tragedy, refused to commit murder for Victor. Victor wanted his father to eliminate the father of his girlfriend, Emily Devereaux, to remove an obstacle to their relationship. Victor, raised in the shadow of this violence, felt betrayed by his father's refusal to commit a crime for love.
But for Perez, this refusal was an agonizing act of self-restraint.
It was. It was his moment of self-realization that perhaps the virus could be paused. He chose his son's innocence over the crime, realizing, you go down that road and someone always pays the price. He was trying, imperfectly, to break the cycle he started by killing his own father. This single refusal to murder for convenience shows that despite his history, Perez retains a fragile, complex moral boundary.
Perez's explosive revelations, naming Hoffa, detailing Ducane's long-term involvement, they immediately destabilize the entire New Orleans criminal and political landscape. Their response is swift and terrifying.
The FBI field office is bombed. The blast destroys documents, files, and the immediate operational capacity of the Bureau. Hartmann immediately suspects Antoine Farad, the man who warned Verlaine. Farad would view collateral damage, even the deaths of federal agents, as a bonus in protecting the old guard's secrets. The investigation, focused on locating Catherine Ducane, is literally wiped clean by the source of the rot they were trying to expose.
The chaos is overwhelming, just as Governor Charles Ducane arrives at the Sonesta to confront the federal agents.
Ducane, displaying his political polish, confronts Hartmann, accusing him of inaction. Hartmann notes that the governor seems too composed for a desperate father, only adding to the suspicion. Ducane demands to know what Hartmann would do if it were his daughter. It's a calculated attempt to gain moral leverage.
But the confrontation is immediately overshadowed by news that the local power structure has just violently consumed itself.
The news breaks that Governor Ducane has been shot 3 times in the chest in Shreveport, one bullet grazing his heart by Antoine Furad's eldest son, who is arrested fleeing the scene. This is the critical climax of the local betrayal. Furad, worried about Perez exposing the entire system, attempts to silence Ducane, suggesting a complete fracturing of the old guard. The organized crime ecosystem, once a quiet, regulated machine, is now tearing itself apart in public.
Amidst this total chaos, the bombing, the shooting, the unresolved kidnapping, Hartmann receives the final forensic material and finally begins his physical departure.
He's given clothes found near Farad territory for forensic analysis, tying the local enforcer directly to the violence. But Hartmann is finished with the immediate investigation. He drives out with Verlaine, feeling like he's breathing the New Orleans air for the very last time. The city's toxicity, its corruption, its moral ambiguity, it no longer has a hold on him.
And his emotional reckoning directly answers Perez's philosophical challenge: choice versus circumstance.
This is the profound takeaway. Hartmann, witnessing the absolute devastation caused by decades of bad choices, Perez's choices, Ducane's choices, Furad's choices, he realizes that his own failures were also choices. His drinking, his prioritization of work over family, they were not predetermined. They were self-inflicted wounds. He concludes definitively, choice governs circumstance.
That realization is his personal redemption, the knowledge he gained from staring into the abyss that was Perez's life.
Absolutely. That internal shift is the source of his strength. He realizes he can choose a different future. He flies immediately back to New York. Despite the delays caused by a truck spill on the Williamsburg Bridge, he makes it to Tompkins Square Park to meet Carol and Jessica. Seeing them, he recognizes that his heart is no longer a fist of tense muscle. The heart beating is now that of a man who retrieved what he thought was lost. He found peace by taking accountability.
And his final act of commitment to his family, a simple phone call, speaks volumes about how thoroughly he has broken the cycle of self-destruction.
Later on Christmas Eve, he calls Jessica, who answers, a small but critical sign that communication is reopening. When Carol, surprised by his emotional availability, asks what got into him, he simply replies with the clarity of a man unburdened. Happy Christmas, I love you, Carol. That decisive, honest commitment to family proves that the deep dive into betrayal ultimately led him to self-reckoning and a chance at genuine happiness.
So in the end, the investigation wasn't solved by traditional FBI means. The girl's fate remains unresolved in the immediate source material, but the political system was undeniably fractured.
The central narrative thrust was exposure. Perez served as the surgical instrument, forcing the public confrontation between acknowledged criminality, the mafia structure he represented, and the far more corrosive political crime that Charles Ducane embodied, disguised as public relations or exercising one's peccadillos as the source defined it. Ducane's actions were fundamentally the same as Perez's, only hidden behind a governor's mandate.
The knowledge gained by Hartmann, by Verlaine, and by us, the observers, is that life often demands accountability, even if it takes decades. What was the ultimate lesson Perez, the killer, imparted to the investigator?
Perez gave a brutal lesson in human fallibility and responsibility. He taught Hartmann that people base crucial decisions on information that is often incorrect or false, and that life is not fair. Yet, despite the inherent unfairness of the world, our peace depends entirely on realizing that accountability stems from our choices, not the circumstances handed to us.
This cycle of violence and accountability brings us back to that provocative symbol Perez referenced, Ouroboros.
The image of the serpent devouring its tail, Ouroboros, perfectly encapsulates this vendetta. It's the idea that the past is an inescapable circle. It constantly resurfaces. Whether it's political corruption in New Orleans, a hidden mafia codename like Gemini used decades later, or personal demons manifesting as destructive behavior, the cycle repeats until someone makes a deliberate choice to break it.
And that leaves us with our final thought for you to consider. How often are the consequences you face today, your conflicts, your difficult circumstances, the things you feel are inescapable, the inevitable long-delayed echoes of choices made by you, or perhaps even by those who came before you years ago? Are you actively breaking the cycle, or are you running from a past that is simply waiting for you to come home?
The deep dive shows us that sometimes the only way to find peace is to finally stop running and turn around to face the reflection of your own choices.
A deeply resonant thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the anatomy of betrayal. We'll be back next time with more crucial nuggets of knowledge.